In this video, we will be exploring some of the strangest, wildest Stranger Things theories, behind the scenes, facts, trivia, interesting bonus media within the Stranger Things universe, and also some very interesting predictions for how this final season will end. So, as always, grab a drink. My choice today is boiled Tears of the Mindflayer. And join me as we explore the ultimate Stranger Things Iceberg. And in the spirit of Christmas, I am doing a giveaway where you can win for free any item of merch that you want from the Connor's Curiosities store. All you need to do to enter is comment down below your favorite Stranger Things character, subscribe to the channel, and this is important, you must be a member of the Discord server. It's free to join, we have a fantastic little group in there at the moment, and I will announce the winner of this giveaway on Christmas Day. So good luck everyone, and may the odds be ever in your favor. The title sequence. So as you all know, the Stranger Things title sequence is pretty iconic. And actually that gives me an excuse to pull this a little closer, because you can't really see it too well in the background. But as you might remember from the TV series, the title sequence and the intro and the font and the vibes of it are all very cool, very unique. And as you might imagine, this was heavily influenced by a few different sources. And it was designed by a company called Imaginary Forces, who are like a creative and design agency. And over the years, they have made, honestly, some pretty cool title sequences, a few of which you can see in popular TV shows, for example. And so when the Duffer Brothers approached Imaginary Forces with the task of making this title sequence for Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers wanted to kind of send over some vibes. They wanted the right look from this. So they ended up sending over a bunch of books to the company. And these were mainly like Stephen King books, you know, 80s kind of horror or fantasy style books. And from these book covers, from these styles, from these fonts, Imaginary Forces sent over a few potential title sequences for the Duffer Brothers to choose from. And they do all look pretty cool, I would say, at least in their basic form. But the Duffer Brothers did decide on one, being this title sequence design, and this was then evolved eventually into the title sequence that we all know and love. And there's a very cool video that I will leave linked down below if you want to go over it in more detail. It kind of explores and explains how they achieve that like glow behind the text. But yeah, it's insane when you think about it, how much a title sequence really adds to the vibe of a series. Far Cry 6. So for anyone who's played Far Cry 6, you would know that it's a pretty wild game. But also within the game, there is a free DLC mission which was released, in which you could play within the Stranger Things universe. And, you know, it takes place in a Russian bunker. It features some of the monsters and characters like the giant spider in the sky, or the Mindflayer. And so yeah, very cool if you want to run around and shoot some things in the world of Stranger Things. The Nether was the original name for the Upside Down. It was named that in the original script. Everyone in the original cast knew it as the Nether, you know, way back then. But since it was changed to the Upside Down in the script over the years, it obviously just became known as the Upside Down, and everyone just forgot the original name of it, which I guess makes sense. You know, names change over the years, and it will now forever be known as the Upside Down. The Lost Sister episode is something I think we would all just rather forget. I mean, yeah, some people do like this episode, but it was kind of an anomaly in season 2, where if you'll remember, 11 meets up with her sister, number 8, and they're not really blood sisters, but just because number 8 used to also be in the experimentation area that 11 was from. But it's kind of like this chick flick sort of episode where 11 is all rebellious and, you know, punk sort of thing, and 8 has these mental powers which are not exactly the same as 11's, in that she can't do like super telekinesis, you know, move things around with her mind, but she can and does specialize in like kind of mind control, in making illusions in people's minds, where, you know, she creates that butterfly, and she also fools people into thinking that there's a brick wall in front of them so they can't drive through it. And as I said, it did have kind of mixed opinions by people, and it was seemingly just kind of memory hold both by the series and by the fans, with some fans denying its existence, some fans saying it just wasn't a canon episode, it was just, you know, a fever dream, it never actually happened. And the series seemed to memory hole it because they didn't really make any references to it later on. There was no like shout outs to it or callbacks or anything. And so it seemed like until one of the recent episodes in season 5, it seemed like perhaps the series had forgotten about it or deliberately ignored the events that happened within it. But obviously, and spoilers ahead, just in case you haven't watched the first part of season 5, but 8 does make a return. She perhaps will be very important for defeating Vecna, and she did originate in the Lost Sisters episode. And I should just mention that there is a much bigger, much greater theory behind the destruction of Vecna that involves 8, which is a theory that we will get down to a little bit further down in the iceberg. Rejected 15 times. So it's honestly not too unusual for shows and films and books, etc., especially ones by relatively unknown writers and directors, to be rejected quite a few times before being, you know, picked up, before being accepted by a publisher or a producer, etc. And Stranger Things was no different. It was rejected by around 15 to 20 different networks and producers, and obviously was eventually picked up by Netflix in the end, which is probably a good thing. But a lot of the criticisms that they had basically said that they weren't sure if this was a show for kids or for adults, because you obviously have a bunch of the main, you know, characters being kids, and so it's like, you know, kids references and kids vibes, and it seems like a very youth-oriented series. But then also when you compare it to something like Goonies or E.T., it's also extremely darker, bloodier, more violent. And so to the networks who, you know, turned down the Stranger Things, they said, you know, we're not gonna greenlight it, but if you want to get it greenlit in the future, you should probably cut out either side of it. So, you know, tone the violence and the bloodiness down a bit and focus more on the children characters and have it more of like, you know, kind of a mystery adventure kind of kids show. Or you should make the kids like secondary characters and focus more on the maybe bloody violent side of it, but centered more around perhaps Hopper and his investigation and less around the kid characters. And once again, I am very glad that they actually stuck to their guns on this one, because I couldn't imagine Stranger Things being as good as it is without, firstly, all of the kid characters. They have like such good 80s vibes, they have fantastic synergies, and of course all of the scariness, the bloodiness. It's just, I think, the perfect mixture of all of these things, all of these Stranger Things. I originally called this entry Back to the Future, E.T., Lord of the Rings, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, Goonies references, but we'll just shorten it all and call it 80s references, I guess. But for anyone who's watched the show, it is very obvious, I think, to anyone that Stranger Things is heavily influenced by all things 80s. And this influence happens both in universe and out of universe, with obviously the writers and directors making references to the 80s, whether that's in terms of vibes, like for instance the title card, or in the form of tropes, of references to 80s films and books, and to filming styles, and I guess to anything like fourth wall related. And one example of this would be Hopper being kind of heavily influenced or based on Indiana Jones, where, you know, he's this tough sort of, you know, he becomes an adventurer basically, or explorer. And also with the references of him kind of going back for his hat, never leaving it behind. I think that's a pretty obvious reference to Indiana Jones. And in the fact that they actually used some scenes from the 80s film Stand By Me. They actually used some lines from some of the scenes with the original cast members, or even before they were cast members, they had them do certain scenes from the film in their auditions, because that was clearly the sort of style and vibe that they were going for. Stand By Me, the film, was based on The Body, which was the name of the book by Stephen King, which is also the name of episode 4 in the first season. So yeah, a lot of direct and indirect references to the 80s, to Stephen King, etc. But we also have a bunch of references in universe, in that, you know, certain characters are, for example, watching Back to the Future, or they're dressing up like the Ghostbusters, or they're even acting and kind of dressing up like, for instance, E.T., which for something like this is hard to tell whether this is out of universe and this is the directors and the writers kind of styling it that way, or whether in universe some of the characters themselves saw E.T. and they actually got a, you know, inspiration from watching E.T. to dress Eleven up in this way. I think the lines are always a little blurred with things like this, but a pretty interesting bonus fact here, I would say, is that Sean Astin, aka Bob, aka Sam from Lord of the Rings, was actually one of the kids in the Goonies. So he acted in the Goonies as a kid, and then he played the role of Bob in this Stranger Things series inspired by a bunch of 80s media. And also he was Sam from Lord of the Rings, which also gets quoted in season 5 of the Stranger Things, or the Stranger Things series. So I guess Sam, or Sean, is like the glue that holds all of these things together. In tier 2, we have the Chernobyl Disaster. And just before we get into this one, folks, if you are enjoying the video, please do leave a like, as it massively helps me out. And if you would like to see when future videos are released, please do hit the subscribe button and bell icons. You can always unsubscribe at the end of this video, no harm done. And if you have any hype points left, and I still don't fully know how this hype thing works, but if you would be so kind, just hit the hype on the video. All of these things massively help me out and, you know, help me make more videos. But let's get into the Chernobyl disaster. So before season 5, there was this big theory saying that Stranger Things would basically lead up to and tie into and perhaps cause the Chernobyl disaster, which was that huge nuclear meltdown that occurred in 1986 in Ukraine, which killed, in the end, like thousands of people. And with Stranger Things happening in like 1983, 1984, 1985, people thought that it might culminate in 1986 with like this crazy Vecna sort of battle, and within this battle they would cause the, you know, explosion or nuclear meltdown that ended up causing Chernobyl. But with season 5 including a kind of time skip or time jump, which ended up being like a year and a half, this brought the official Stranger Things time a little bit ahead of the Chernobyl disaster, and so it's not really possible anymore that the Stranger Things universe can cause the Chernobyl disaster. You know, it is somewhat possible that these two will link up in some way, because we know the Russians had access to some of the Demogorgons. They had their own kind of gateway to the Upside Down, and so we might find out later that this was caused in 1986 by the Russians, perhaps. But for that, I guess we will have to wait and see. The Chrissy Wake Up MP3 is honestly one of the greatest things that I've ever seen. And I'm not sure, sadly, if I can show you any of the song and the video due to copyright issues, but I will try my absolute best to show you at least part of it. But either way, I will leave a link to it down in the description below. I personally have had it on loop for the last few days, and all jokes aside, it is actually a pretty decent song. So yeah, check it out, make it your ringtone, set it as your alarm in the morning, and you can thank me later. Stranger Things as an anthology series. So originally, Stranger Things was actually intended to be an anthology series, which is basically with each season being the same vibe, more or less, and possibly within the same universe, including the same Upside Down, the same Vecna, but entirely different in every other way. And every anthology series is kind of done a little bit differently. Some do change the universe slightly. Some have it as the same world and the same universe, just different primary characters. And so you can kind of imagine series 1 being more or less the season that we got, with, you know, kids cycling around in Hawkins, and then Will gets taken, and then they do their investigation, etc. And then season 2 maybe focuses on some, I don't know, British adults working in like a bar or a pub or something in the 1990s. And then they happen to stumble upon a gateway that leads to the Upside Down. And, you know, they try and fix it or something. I don't know what British people would do. And then season 3 maybe takes place in the 1920s or the 2020s. Maybe it's a prequel, maybe it's a far sequel, and maybe it takes place in America, you know, maybe California, or maybe Africa or Russia or Europe or something. And it would be entirely different characters. You would kind of, you know, learn and love them just for that season. Or maybe it would be all of that and it would stay in the same time area of the 1980s. But the first series would focus on the kids and Hawkins. The second might focus on, you know, the government and certain government characters. And so I'm not fully against anthology series. If they are done correctly, they can, you know, bring a ton of really cool characters kind of into the mix, into the story. But you also do miss out on multiple series of the Steve-Dustin duo and characters building up over the seasons. So it does have its pros and cons, but they did obviously eventually decide to kind of scrap that idea, as I think they just liked the characters so much. They really liked the actors. They had really good synergies between them. And so they did, in the end, end up keeping it as a standard series. Jamie Campbell Bower. So I personally knew this name from his music, as I've loved his music for absolutely years, you know, listened to him on my Walkman, but I only knew him by his music. I've never been to any of his shows. I didn't really know him by his face, and so I didn't actually realize that this Jamie Campbell Bower is actually also an actor, and he is the guy who plays Vecna. And he actually also plays a young Grindelwald in Harry Potter. But yeah, for me, this was very interesting. It's always a nice surprise when something like this pops up. And if you haven't already, I would absolutely recommend checking out some of his music.
The devil comes for you.
But actually, while I'm on this topic of actors in Stranger Things making music, there are so many people within this cast that are also musicians. You have Steve Harrington, obviously, having the smash hit End of Beginning. Max has also done a bunch of songs, as has Mike, as has Robin. And Maya Hawke is actually the daughter of Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke, which just absolutely blew my mind. And they're like all really decent songs, which I know when some like actors or artists, for example, go into music, you know, dabble in music, it's like, oh, okay, the music is like, you know, whatever. But I'm pretty sure everyone absolutely loves End of Beginning, even if you didn't even know of Steve Harrington or even Stranger Things in general. And one of my personal favorites is by Robin, and this is just such a fantastic, cool standalone song.
Missing out, missing out, missing out.
So yeah, seriously, go and check them out, and I will leave some links to some of my favorite songs by them down in the description below. The 30-page Upside Down document is exactly what it sounds like. It is a 30-page document that the Duffer Brothers had written up, partly for themselves and partly for Netflix, basically explaining in full, as much as they could at the time, the realm and the backstory and the history, etc. of the Upside Down. And we don't know exactly what is written in it, as sadly it was never leaked, but just from the kind of snippets, from the hints of what the Duffer Brothers have revealed over the years, we can pretty much gather that the real world, you know, Hawkins, and the Upside Down and Dimension X are all separate realms or separate dimensions. And the regular world has, you know, always existed as long as the Earth has been here, I guess. Obviously, Dimension X has been here at least a few thousand years, although maybe a few million years, maybe longer than the Earth itself, who really knows. And the Upside Down is thought very likely to have only existed for a few years, with it being created as a strange kind of mirror copy of Hawkins back when Eleven opened the mothergate in season 1. And I say we're not entirely entirely sure because it is possible that the Upside Down existed in some form, but that it was just frozen in 1983. Or it could be that it didn't exist before this date whatsoever. And as we do learn from Stranger Things, all of the Demogorgons, for example, and the Demo Bats and the Demo Dogs, as well as all of this, weird vine tentacle stuff, and above all, the Mindflayer, they are all not from the Upside Down, but in fact originate from Dimension X. And so it's like, if you can imagine, you have like regular Hawkins, which is just the normal world that they're in. You have regular Hawkins on this side, and in between you seem to have the Upside Down. And then over here, I guess you would have the Dimension X. But I think this connection between all of the dimensions or realms is not really fully explained in the series, at least just yet. Like, it could be, and again, spoilers for midway through season 5 here, but it could be that weird kind of wall that's circling the Upside Down. It could be just outside of that is Dimension X. And so maybe the Upside Down is like within Dimension X, but it's just kind of impenetrable unless you're like Vecna or something. Or they could actually be entirely separate dimensions, in which case occasionally you do get, some of the creatures or monsters from Dimension X flowing over into the Upside Down. And then they would, rip open these gateways or portals and then jump through into the regular world. But it seems like, to me at least, that the Upside Down is like a middle way, or a gateway, if you will, between Dimension X and the regular world. MKUltra is a wild topic if you haven't heard about it before, but this was a real proven set of experiments done in the US by, for example, the CIA in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that focused mainly on kind of mind control, telekinesis, loading people up on just vast levels, vast amounts of substances, Lucy in the sky with diamonds sort of stuff, as well as truth serum, just dosing them with crazy amounts, blasting music into their ears, and also phrases, be they positive or negative. Just like they had them sit down in a chair, they were crazy high, they were looking at a screen, an insanely bright screen that was like flashing these subliminal messages, and at the same time they were blasting them with super loud noises, just basically trying to like force reprogram these people. And the idea was to kind of break them down, break down their mind in order to build their mind up again as some sort of sleeper soldier, or, a super dedicated spy that would as soon as you say a certain word, it would just trigger them, and they would then immediately do whatever they were programmed to do. But that was just one of the experiments. They did a bunch like this during the time, and they were also at the time working on stuff like astral projection, stuff like controlling things with your mind, and this is seemingly what a large part of the Stranger Things, government experiments seem to be based on, with Eleven's mother actually going through some of these experiments when they went to interview her with these large doses of substances, basically making her kind of catatonic, just destroying her mind, which did actually happen to a lot of the real life MKUltra subjects. And as I said, this has all been proven. It was an actual project that took place, and it was super illegal, super unethical at the time. And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you, the government wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, they would. The arcade was made from an old laundromat. Is just a little behind-the-scenes fact that the arcade from season 2 mainly was in real life just an old automat that was repurposed. It was made all cool and neon-y and 80s-y for the series, and while I don't think they have kept it exactly the same as it was before, I feel like if they kept it all 80s vibey and actually converted it into an arcade and made it sort of like a tourist attraction, a visiting spot sort of thing, I personally think they would have made a bunch of money from that. But it is very cool nonetheless. The mall was made in a section of a real still open mall. So if you ever did wonder, the mall in season 3, Starcourt Mall, was actually filmed in an actual mall called Gwinnett Place. And the set designers honestly did a fantastic job. They basically went in, they rented out a certain part of the mall, and then they designed it. They built out all of these shops and shop fronts, often designing the front and the kind of base of the stores, and also designing everything inside, along with actual products on shelves and actual counters and actual sort of, back areas, or as far back as you would need to go with filming. And this was all at the start, so even before they knew what kind of exact specific shots that they would need. And this was, I guess, a pretty good thing, because it would suck to, have a shot ready and then kind of make a mistake where you slightly include a shot that's not fully complete or designed. So they were just like, we're gonna just design and build out everything. And so no matter what shots we choose to get, no matter what angles or camera angles or whatever, the mall will always look fantastic and complete and real. And I think they did a very good job with exactly that. Millie Bobby Brown almost quit. So at the age of 10, Millie Bobby Brown actually auditioned for a role in not Stranger Things at the time, but in Game of Thrones. And she auditioned for Lyanna Mormont, which she said the audition went absolutely horribly, and she was actually considering quitting acting after that audition. But she decided to go through with basically one more interview, which ended up being 11 in Stranger Things. Tier 3, Dacre Montgomery's audition tape. So speaking of auditions, Dacre Montgomery's was pretty interesting to say the least, and it's quite impressive, quite hilarious if you want to watch it for yourself. But it includes, famously, Billy just jamming out, dancing around, at one point even dancing topless to Come On Eileen. And it really, if you watch it through, it really just seems supernatural for him. Like, not like supernatural spooky, but like he just seems very natural in the role, which probably explains why he wasn't even called back for further auditions, and they just gave him the role after this audition tape. Robin is a time traveler. Is a theory that I don't want to spend too much time on, because I don't think it really has too much grounding at all. But it basically says that Robin traveled backwards in time and isn't a lesbian, but just says that to Steve because she secretly likes him, but she can't be with him because she's from the future and she knows what's going to happen. And it also ties in like some times where she figured things out very quickly. So it's like she didn't actually figure it out, she just knew it from the future because it already happened. And just what is this theory? Hopper actor as 11 is a hilarious fake interview by David Harbour in which he said that he originally, instead of auditioning for Jim Hopper, originally he auditioned for the role of 11. And he says that he would have brought his own, unique twist on the character. And I hope I can show some of the footage for this, as it is honestly just amazing. But if not, as always, I will leave a link down below and you can check it out for yourself.
I'm 11 now, bitch.
Joe Keery Dominos is something I think Joe Keery once completely buried. I mean, probably. But he actually did an advert for Domino's in which he basically reenacts a scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, except he's running towards pizza. And honestly, it's just a little bit corny. It's a little bit cheesy, pun absolutely intended, but it's also very funny, quite hilarious. It's always nice to see actors or actresses we love in, random adverts like this. So as always, I feel like I've said this a million times. I will leave a link down below and you can check it out if you would like. 11 becomes the final villain is a theory that says that 11 will be the big bad at the end of season 5, and that maybe it's up to Will, maybe it's up to 8 and or the rest of the gang, and or maybe some other people which we haven't mentioned yet. It's up to all of them to defeat 11 and to save the day. And there's kind of a few theories kind of bundled into one with this entry, because there's a deeper theory that says that maybe 11 was, the monster all along, which I don't really know about that theory. I think it would kind of cheapen and invalidate 11 as a character if we say like, yeah, Eleven never really existed. She was always just possessed by this Mindflayer. But there's also the theory that Vecna, or I should say Henry Creel, is actually kind of a good guy in that, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, this theory, because there's this backstory where Henry was exposed to Dimension X as a child, but it says that since he was exposed, the Mind Flayer kind of went into him, corrupted him, possessed him, which led to him, killing his whole family, and eventually into becoming Vecna. But that deep, deep down is still Henry Creel, that young, innocent boy, and he may very well be vindicated, be freed eventually, much like Billy was in season 3 and some of the other humans. And so we might end up seeing Vecna kind of break out of his trance, become a good guy, and the Mind Flayer might then take over 11. And this would lead to obviously 11 turning pure evil and Vecna teaming up with the gang, with number 8, and defeating 11, indirectly defeating the Mind Flayer, and then hopefully not killing 11, but kind of saving her in the process. And that is kind of a wild theory, I know, but I mean, when you end a series halfway through the series, or you pause it and, we're not going to get it until Christmas and New Year's, I mean, what else do you expect but wild speculation? Lonnie was originally going to save Nancy and Jonathan at the end of season 1, episode 8. So Lonnie Byers, who was Will and Jonathan's dad, who was, if you remember from all the way back in season 1, just a terrible, awful dad and an awful husband. Like, honestly, I just hated him so much, and so did probably a lot of other people. But it was originally scripted that he would be the one to save Nancy and Jonathan when they were attacked in episode 8 by the Demigorgon, or the Demogorgon. And for whatever reason, maybe because they didn't want to give him any sort of redemption arc, they had Steve go back for the pair and help them fight off the monster, which gave Steve, a bit of a redemption arc, kind of tied him in with the good guys a little bit more, and they didn't waste any more unnecessary screen time on the dead-end character that was Lonnie Byers. The Meatflayer's tentacles sounds a bit strange, but this is just a little behind the scenes kind of production tidbit where the Meatflayer's tentacles, which if you don't remember, the Meatflayer was this thing in season 2 or season 3 rather, which was basically like the Mind Flayer. It was the shape of the Mind Flayer from Dimension X, except it was made of meat, of flesh, and so people called it the Meatflayer. But if you remember, it has these like crazy sort of tentacles that have like teeth on, and they're just absolutely horrible. But early on, they had these tentacles kind of non-retractable. And so they would just be kind of like an octopus, just always out, flying around. And then when it attacked, it would be like... But they did end up changing them to be retractable, and that was partly to make it maybe a bit easier when it was walking around, because they felt if it was always, long tentacles everywhere, it might trip over on itself, and also to make some of the animations easier in that every time they saw it, they didn't have to animate dozens and hundreds of little tentacles out there. And so yeah, not a massive breakthrough fact that, but it is, I think, always nice to see a bit of the behind the scenes. Tier 4, Will kills Bob. So I think I can pretty safely say that everyone loved Bob. He was kind, he was smart, he was loving and caring, and originally the plan was for Bob's character to actually be less nice, less sweet, less wholesome, but not necessarily a bad or rude character. He was meant to be just like, the normal sort of boyfriend, hey, how's it going sort of thing. He wasn't bad, he wasn't necessarily like wholesome or good, and the writers and the showrunners actually planned to kill him off much sooner. But when they got Sean Astin for the role, they said he just he smashed the role. He was so lovable and wholesome that it made his character much more likable, and so they actually decided to postpone his death and keep him in the series for a few more episodes. But originally his death would have been actually by a possessed Will. So it would have been Will just going into the house in episode 3 and then randomly just becoming possessed, killing Bob, and then just reverting to his Will form. And I'm glad they kind of didn't do that, because I think a child killing, anyone this early on in the series, it would be very traumatic for Will. It would be very traumatic for everyone else in the series. And honestly, if Will had actually killed Bob, at least Sean Astin's Bob, I honestly don't think there would be any level of redemption available for him in the eyes of the fans. You don't just kill Bob and get away with it. But yeah, obviously later on he ended up being killed by the demo dogs instead of by Demo Will, and I think that's in large part a testament to just how lovely of an actor Sean Astin actually was. The Montauk Project was a few different things, and it was firstly the original name for the TV show written by the Duffer Brothers, because it was based loosely, roughly, on the Montauk Project, which is mainly a conspiracy theory, which we will cover more in full in the Conspiracy Theory Iceberg, coming soon to cinemas near you, or to phones or TVs, I guess. But this theory says that there have been these top secret government experiments taking place in and around Montauk, New York, hence the name of the project. And these experiments involve time travel, mind control, psychic and psychokinetic abilities, remote viewing, massive cover-ups, and so you can really start to see where these Stranger Things plot and story and universe gets some of its inspiration from. And so, as I mentioned, Stranger Things was originally called Montauk, or the Montauk Project, and they have, I think, very obviously changed a bunch of things. They've added their own flavor, their own spin on the characters, and I don't think that basing your TV series on government experiments is cheap or shallow writing, as it's just such a wide and vague topic. It's you could probably have 20 different films and series all based on and around the Bigfoot, and still they would all be unique. You could put their own spin on each one. But Montauk, and I think I've pronounced this word differently every single time, but Montauk does tie into these two later entries in the video. One being the Philadelphia experiment, which we'll cover just after this one, and another being the Duffer Brothers being accused of stealing this other film called Montauk, and they were actually sued for this. And that is something that we will cover a little bit further down in the iceberg. The Philadelphia experiment. So this is an experiment that we actually covered in the World War II iceberg. So go and check that out if you haven't already. And it might be a little confusing because it kind of blends truth, real proven events with speculated events, with actually some of the plot of Stranger Things. So I will try and clear everything up. But the USS Eldridge was a ship that did exist in reality, and the Philadelphia experiment was a suspected and rumored secret, top secret government experiment carried out by the US Navy, in which they tried to take this ship, the USS Eldridge, and they tried to teleport it from Philadelphia to Virginia. And this was to test and experiment, obviously, teleportation, but also invisibility. And the idea was to get around, have a new way for ships to get around German radar during World War II. And now, as I said, this was all rumored to have happened. There's no concrete evidence for it, but in the Stranger Things universe, these experiments did actually canonically take place. And so in Stranger Things, the backstory is that the USS Eldridge did actually, or was actually teleported, and it went not from Philadelphia to Virginia, but it went from Philadelphia to Dimension X, which was, as you'll recall, the very same place that Vecna found the Mindflayer and the Demogorgons. And so in the Stranger Things lore, the ship was transported to Dimension X, and when it eventually came back into the real world, everyone on board the ship had died except for Brenner's father. And then Brenner, as a child or as a young adult, he found out about this other dimension, about this strange other world from his father. And so as he was growing up, he was basically obsessed by it, and it led him on a lifelong mission in order to find and harness this strange dimension that his father had visited many years ago. And so he obviously worked his way up in the government and was eventually put in charge of these, experiments. And this was actually before the show took place, before the existence of 11. But Brenner was at the time making decent progress before one of his workers actually stole some of their gateway equipment. And this worker, he took a bunch of the equipment, he ran away with it, he hid in some caves in Nevada. And if none of this lore sounds familiar, that's because a fair amount of it is from the Stranger Things stage play, which is canon, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. But the scientist took all of this equipment into the cave. Henry Creel, as a young boy, went exploring in these caves, and he eventually found this equipment. He accidentally activated it, and it transported him into Dimension X. The scientist that stole the equipment ended up dying, but Henry came back after around 12 hours, and when he came back, he was seemingly in some way corrupted. So doctors did tests on him. He had this strange blood type, an unknown blood type, and he was showcasing this strange, cruel, evil, some would say, behavior. And so it seemed like he was just a normal boy before this first exposure to Dimension X, which seemingly somehow corrupted him. And so then Brenner is, looking around for his equipment. He eventually finds the caves. He finds this telescope belonging to Henry Creel. And then from that, he tracks down Henry Creel. He takes him, he does experiments on him, etc. And then we kind of go into that kind of links up to the history of the Stranger Things TV series. And it is kind of somewhat reminiscent of how Will was taken into the Upside Down and was eventually in certain ways corrupted. And so for those who haven't seen or learnt about the stage play, this also does explain, I'm pretty sure, why Henry looked so terrified when he was in his dreams or his mind or whatever, memories, and he followed Max to these caves, and she said he just will never enter these caves because this is the point where he was first transported into Dimension X. And so it is the point where he was, corrupted, and even if it means letting Max go, he's still just seemingly physically, mentally can't enter these caves. It's just too painful for him to go back into that memory. And so this ties back into one of the earlier theories we had of within Vecna, deep, deep down being this good guy, Henry Creel. The innocence and the goodness, for lack of a better word, that he had as a kid. Like, it is still in there, deep, deep down, but someone just needs to, purge him of the Mindflayer influence. And so yeah, a very cool theory, I think, which I hope they do kind of explore towards the end of the last season. The fake body scare. So in season 1, when they had this, fake Will body that the government had produced in order to cover up the crazy government experiments that were taking place. Behind the scenes, the crew actually took this fake body and they brought it to the mother of the actor who played Will. And they just kind of surprised her with this, ooh, look at this. And this was naturally very shocking for her because she just sees this super realistic dead body of her son. But when she realized kind of what it was, she apparently had a good sense of humor about it and thought that the body and the quality of this prop was insanely high, and she just thought it was very cool. A natural 20. And I can't seem to find my D20s at the moment, which is a little disappointing. But in the first episode of season 4, the gang are at the end stages, the finale of their D&D campaign, and they are fighting Vecna. And it seems like in this campaign that all hope is kind of lost until Erica rolls a natural 20, and this is the killing blow that allows the team to defeat Vecna. So there are some theories that this was kind of foreshadowing, and let's do a little bit of math here. I know, everyone's favorite subject, but we have 11 as a character, and we also now have 8, who was introduced last episode, episode 4, which if you add them together, this makes a total of 19. And so really, we just need one more in order to make it a 20 and to defeat Vecna. And so there are two main theories regarding this. One theory says that Will is number 1 because he was the first person that Vecna took. Vecna even tells him in episode 4 that, you were the first one, you are number one sort of thing. And so it could be 11 plus 8 plus Will. They are the three people who kind of have to, you know, or they make number 20 between them, and then they are mainly responsible for defeating Vecna. Or it could be that Henry Creel, being the actual number one in the child experiments, it could be that if we go back to one of our previous theories of Henry Creel being still there in some way in his, you know, goodness, that it could be that they kind of purge Vecna of his bad influence. He comes over to the good side, and then you have 11, you have 8, and you have Henry Creel being number 1, and they are all responsible for then defeating the Mindflayer. The Mindflayer opened the mothergate, not 11. So this is a very cool theory that I just thought of while researching this iceberg. But what if, and hear me out here, but what if when 11 attacked Henry, pinning him up against the wall in the research facility, what if she actually didn't open the gateway, but because Henry was already, you know, exposed to Dimension X, he was already influenced by the Mindflayer, what if 11 was actually just going to kill him, and then the Mindflayer detected that one of his creatures was being killed, that being Henry. So it was the Mindflayer instead who forced this gateway to open, and then, you know, disintegrate Henry, drag him through the gateway in order to basically save Henry so that 11 didn't end up killing him. And it's pretty clear that this does sometimes kind of happen. Like, for example, when Will was originally infected, and then they ended, you know, strapping him down, turning the heat up. He kind of started freaking out, started fighting back almost against his own family, because whatever was within him, whatever he was infected by, was fighting for its own survival. So what if the same thing happened with Henry in the Rainbow Room? And it's not the craziest of theories. It is a little bit of a wild theory, but it would make, I think, for a very interesting twist and for a very interesting season finale. Different roles. So as you can imagine, as happens with many TV shows and movies, etc., many actors and actresses who audition for a certain role sometimes end up auditioning for either multiple roles, or they get given a different role than the one that they were originally auditioning for. You know, maybe the casting director says, you know, you're not really perfect for this role, but there is this other role which I think you would be amazing at. And so that's often how stuff like that happens. And so in Stranger Things, you had both Noah Schnapp and Finn Wolfhard, who play Will and Mike respectively. They both actually ended up auditioning for both of these roles in the end, meaning that in some alternate universe, we could have seen a Noah Schnapp Mike and a Finn Wolfhard Will, which is pretty strange, I know. Joe Keery didn't originally audition for Steve, as in the script for season 1, Steve was like, you know, this rude bully, and Joe Keery is and was a very nice guy, so he was like, you know, that role really isn't for me, and he originally auditioned for the role of Jonathan, Will's brother, which honestly I think he would do a pretty good job in that role, but I also couldn't really see anyone else in the role of Steve, so I mean, there's that. But they said that Joe Keery, while he was on set, while he was doing his lines, he was such like a kind sweetheart. He was super nice. He was super caring to all of the other staff members or set people or whatever they're called. And so that was at least in part responsible for his character having this, you know, great redemption arc and becoming the mother hen of the group, the babysitter. There's also, as we covered earlier, Sean Astin, aka Bob, aka Sam, who originally auditioned for the role of Murray, but then he was given the role of Bob. And the actor who played number 2 actually auditioned originally for the role of Eddie, which, if you want to learn more about this, he does have a fantastic YouTube channel where he has like acting breakdowns, acting tutorials.
You want something, freak?
Iconic.
Also, he goes over how much money he made from the Stranger Things appearance. And yeah, seems like a very cool guy in general. Definitely check out his channel and let him know I sent you. But they also originally had a few other actors and actresses in mind for some of the bigger roles. Like, for example, they wanted Ewan McGregor or Sam Rockwell for Hopper, or someone like Marissa Tomei for the role of Joyce. But personally, I think both David and Winona are absolutely perfect for their roles. The Hawkins van stunt. So if you can remember, all the way back in season 1, which aired like 30 years ago, apparently. I think it did actually air back in 1983, or at least it certainly feels that long between seasons. But there was this scene of the kids just cycling along. You know, they're being chased by this top secret government agent van, and then Eleven just like just flips the whole van, the whole truck, just right over their heads. And it is honestly one of the coolest scenes in the entire series. But this van flipping stunt was actually done practically. And the first time they tried to do it, the first time they tried to flip it, the van didn't actually flip. It just kind of went poof. You know, it was a failure basically. But they got it on the second try apparently. But the original footage of the van flipping was actually posted online to YouTube by someone who just lives down the street. And I'll try and show a little bit of it here, you know, if they let me. But regardless, I will leave a link in the description down below. The Duffer Brothers directing it. So before they created Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers actually originally pushed to direct It by Stephen King. And they obviously didn't get the role, or they didn't get the job of directors, but they were clearly wanting to get involved in some sort of project with this sort of vibe, you know, be it a TV show or a film or what have you. And so after a while, they just kind of pulled a Thanos and just said, fine, we'll do it ourselves. And they took inspiration from Stephen King's novels, from the 80s, from that whole sort of vibe, and they wrote Stranger Things, and the rest is history. Bob killed off by the writers is something that literally happened. Like, literally. So in the scene where Bob is killed, one of the staff writers was actually the person in the demo dog suit, because basically they decided, okay, he's going to be killed by demo dogs. And they also said that if it was just fully CGI, that the you know, the struggle, the fight with him wouldn't feel fully real. And so they said they needed just someone, just anyone to like wear this suit and be a stand-in for the demo dogs. And one of the show's writers, Kate Treffery, was apparently just like, can I do it? And they were like, yeah, why not? Just put on the suit, go and wrestle Sean Astin. And so literally the writers killed Bob, sued for stealing ideas. So this is an interesting theory slash entry slash accusation. But as we covered earlier, the inspiration for Stranger Things was likely based, at least loosely, on the Montauk Project. You know, that rumored conspiracy theory of a military base in New York that was doing crazy secret government experiments that included, but were not limited to, mind control and dimensions, portals, monsters, etc. And this all brings us to a man named Charlie Kessler, who was a filmmaker who had earlier in recent years approached the Duffer Brothers and pitched his short film that he had written called Montauk. And then, you know, he didn't really have any communication with the brothers after this. And then boom, suddenly, years later, they went on to write their own series based on the Montauk Project, which was also preliminarily called Montauk. And it should be said that both the film by Charlie and the Stranger Things were likely based on the original 1992 book called The Montauk Project Experiments in Time. And it's a bit strange because if you are the Duffer Brothers and someone comes up to you and says, oh yes, I wrote a film based on the life of Jesus or something, and then you say, oh yeah, it's actually pretty cool, you don't want to work with his story, but does that mean you can't write your own film, you know, surrounding Jesus like forever? Like, do the Duffer Brothers necessarily owe this guy any money or any rights or partial rights to the Stranger Things series just because he also wrote a series based around Montauk? Like, I would say probably know, but Charlie Kessler claimed that the brothers clearly stole this film from him. They said that Stranger Things was just a copy and paste of Montauk Project, or of his film Montauk, and they just changed the characters' names and all that, and that he deserved some money from them taking his idea. So he sued them, he took them to court, but he later dropped the lawsuit in 2019 after realizing that there was basically no case. He couldn't really prove that they had taken this idea from him. It was such a vague idea anyway. And they were both obviously based on the same kind of source material, the same source book and, conspiracy theories, etc. And strictly just telling people about your creation, about your book or film or story or series, doesn't legally protect you. It doesn't mean that they can't write something similar. So yeah, he dropped the lawsuit, I think probably quite sensibly, as I don't see there being really a case here. And I also don't think that the Duffer Brothers actually stole anything from him. Like the vibe of the 80s, Stephen King, etc., it's quite kind of iconic, and so it's fine to get inspiration from that. And the idea of having secret conspiracies, secret government experiments and tests, that I think also is quite vague, it's quite a wide topic, and it is pretty cool, which makes sense for it to be covered on a TV series. The Eddie Kas Theory. So this is one of the major theories for the end of this series. And if you're watching this in the far future, then, maybe this never happens. And if that is the case, then you can comment down below. But this theory relates to our old friend Vecna. And this is not Vecna from Stranger Things, although it kind of is. But the Vecna in D&D, he has kind of a lieutenant sort of thing, a right-hand man, who is a vampire named Kas. And Kas is like best buddies with Vecna, but in the end, he betrays Vecna and assists in his downfall. And this theory kind of connects Eddie, and there's a few points here, so I'll try and tie it all together. But Kas is a vampire lord. Eddie was killed by bats or demo bats. He also had some bat tattoos on him, or as I like to call them, Batoos. And famously, the group never went back to get Eddie's body. And so this theory says that Vecna will basically take Eddie's body, that Vecna will resurrect him into basically Kas, so a bat-based sort of undead being or creature, and in some way Eddie will be able to free himself from this control, and will, in the series finale, he will actually end up fighting back against and betraying Vecna. And whether Eddie will actually survive this ordeal and come back as a living character, or whether he will just kind of fade away into dust or die, like his body was just a puppet all along and there's no way he can actually come back. We're not entirely sure, as it is a very wild theory with no super solid grounding, but it is, I think, at least for me, one of the more interesting theories. The Stranger Things comics. So if you didn't know, there are, as well as the Stranger Things TV series and the Stranger Things Broadway show, there are the Stranger Things comics, which cover basically various backstories and prequels sort of thing. They cover a few different characters and what they were up to before the series. They cover a few different plot points not included in the series. And honestly, they are mostly pretty cool, but a few of them have been debated over the years on whether or not they are canon, whether or not they tie in officially, canonically into the TV series universe. But I personally like them, and so if you want some more Stranger Things, I would highly recommend checking them out. The Stranger Things Stageplay, and we have covered this in little bits and bobs over this video, over this iceberg, so I won't go too deep into it. But this is the Stranger Things Stageplay called The First Shadow, but it basically covers the early days of Henry Creel, of his family, even before they moved to Hawkins. And this is where we get, the knowledge, the information regarding the Philadelphia experiment and the USS Eldridge, and also Henry's exposure to Dimension X as a child, and also ties in some of the backstory regarding the caves within his mind. And as with the comics, there are, constant debates about whether this stage play is canon or not, as there are kind of one or two bits of information that are not super clear, I guess, that are not super consistent between the TV series and the stage play. But for the most part, it is widely accepted to be canon and part of the Stranger Things TV series universe. Post Animal is simply just the ex-band of Joe Keery. And he is widely known, I think, at the minute for his solo performance, Joe, which I think that's how he said you pronounce it. It's either that or DJO or Joe. But anyway, before he performed as Joe, he was in a band named Post Animal, who are described as a psychedelic rock band. And honestly, the music is pretty good. Like, absolutely, I would recommend checking it out. And if you end up hating it, just stop listening to it, I guess. Very cool band. Joe Keery did leave it, as I mentioned, in 2018 due to certain acting commitments, but he decided to rejoin in 2025. So, I mean, we'll see how long he ends up sticking around for. Hopefully he stays with the band, as well as doing, you know, some new solo music, some new solo songs, as I think both are absolutely fantastic. But yeah, as I said, check it out if you like. This guy caused the end of season 3. And I know I've said his actual name many times during the World War II iceberg. So as always, check that out if you enjoy history, if you enjoy World War II. I mean, nobody really enjoyed World War II. But yeah, if you want to learn more about the history of it and the secret government experiments, etc. But I am choosing to cut out the name here in this video for a few reasons, mainly because the World War II video is like a historic video, which seems to get a pass through the filter for some reason. And so this Stranger Things iceberg is not historical, and so even mentioning, just saying the name, can get this entire video taken down, and I don't really want that. But yeah, anyway, as you can imagine, this theory, or at least observation, is absolutely wild. But basically, at the end of season 3, they need Planck's constant, which is, for the purposes of the TV series, it is a mathematical number. And this number is, well, it's changed over the years, but for the most part, it is 6.2607004. And obviously, all of this is massively simplified. So if you're a mathematician, then don't attack me. But they need this number because it is the passcode to get further into the Russian base. And so they ask around, nobody knows it, or they've forgotten it, or what have you. But Dustin ends up calling his girlfriend Susie, who is a massive nerd, and she does know Planck's constant. But before she tells them the number, she wants to sing a duet with Dustin, with the song they sing being Never Ending Story, which is an absolute classic. But they sing the song, she hands over the information, or she tells them the number, and then they use the password works, they get further into the base, they save the day. And so how does all of this tie back to World War II Germany? Well, Never Ending Story was composed by a man named Klaus Doldinger, and partly why he got this role was that he was made famous for his composing in the film Das Boot, which was a film about World War II. And who started World War II? Well, obviously, it was the man with the mustache. And so without him, you wouldn't have a World War II, and that means you wouldn't have Das Boot, and so Klaus Doldinger wouldn't be famous enough to compose Never Ending Story, which means Never Ending Story doesn't exist in the same form that it is today, which means no singing duet between Susie and Dustin, which means no Planck's constant, which means no password, which means they fail their mission and everyone dies. And so yeah, that's the theory. Pretty wild. The Escalator Slide. So in season 3, if you'll remember this little bitty scene where Robin and co end up sliding down this escalator, they got the idea for this scene from 2 places. One, it was inspired by Dawn of the Dead, in which some of their characters slide down this escalator, also in an empty mall, which very cool film, check it out if you like classics. But secondly, when the kids were on set, you know, they had rented out this mall, or this segment of a mall, they had done it all up, all 80s like, and the kids on the set kept sliding down the escalator. And so it was partly because of those 2 reasons the writers or directors were like, we should probably get a scene of them like sliding down the escalator. Like, it seems to look pretty cool. And they ended up actually doing it. The stairs scene. So in season 3, episode 5, when Nancy and Jonathan are running away from Bruce in the hospital, there is this one shot where they basically enter this stairwell, they run down the stairs, and Natalia and Charlie, who were the two people who played the roles of Nancy and Jonathan, they said in an interview that that one scene was absolutely exhausting and took forever because there were multiple shots taken from different angles, a few of which we don't actually see in the final cut, and for each take they sometimes had to change the cameras out, they had to shuffle the cameras around, change slightly the angles, and every time they did this, Nancy and Jonathan had to run down the stairs once again. And to make the scene realistic, they had to be quite out of breath when they were doing this. So they said they would like be completely out of breath, they would run down the stairs, and then the directors would be like, okay, take a 10-15 minute break. We're just going to change the cameras, we're going to shift the angles a little bit, and then you can come back and do another take. But obviously during that time, they would get whatever the opposite of out of breath is, they would get in breath. And so even though they had 10 or 15 minutes break in between these shots, they had to then start doing like running on the spot, jumping jacks, so that when they actually filmed the shot, they were once again out of breath. The red suit. So leading on from our last entry in the hospital scene, you know, where the creepy Meatflayer monster starts to appear for the first time, it looks on screen absolutely horrifying, absolutely terrifying, and it was, except for the actors, because what they saw in the scene was literally this. And I know it's not a massive surprise that they didn't use a an actual monster for this scene. Like, it was just a stand-in who, you know, represented the being in general, and then they did all the CGI work around it. But it is still hilarious nonetheless that it was just like some random dude in a red spandex suit with, like, I don't know whether it is a motorcycle visor or something. But yeah, moving on. The Stargate Project was a secret government project that is super interesting to read about and to read further into. And it took place around the 70s, 80s, 90s, and as with a lot of these secret experiments, it focused on mind control, on telekinesis, astral projection, and we did cover it in one of the icebergs I've done. I've honestly done so many, I think I've lost track. I think it was either the Secret Experiments iceberg or the Unsolved Mysteries one, perhaps, and was largely what the sci-fi stuff in Stranger Things, or at least the government, you know, cover-ups and experimentation, etc., was actually based off. And we'll probably end up covering this again in the Conspiracy Theory iceberg, which I know we have mentioned it a few times so far. Even though this particular project wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was proven fully 100% to have existed, to have been carried out by the US government, while they were researching all of this mind control and traveling to other planets within your mind sort of thing. But although that's all like surface level stuff, there are the deeper, darker things which haven't been proven to exist or haven't been proven to have happened, and in some theories actually getting video recorded evidence of heaven and hell, which in some theories is held deep underground in these vaults in the Vatican. But as I said, that is for the Conspiracy Theory iceberg, but this was just the Stargate Project, which clearly was, at least in part, some inspiration for Stranger Things. X-Men issue 134. So this theory observation is very cool, and it goes back all the way to season 1, episode 1, before Will was even ever taken. And in this episode, there's this scene where Will races Dustin on their bikes, with the winner of this race being allowed to take any comic book that the loser has. And in this scene, they mention X-Men issue 134, which is very interesting for a few reasons. And the issue involves the X-Men, obviously, but they are fighting an evil group called the Hellfire Club, which was a name obviously later used for the D&D gang of Eddie. But this comic also involves Jean Grey, who is an X-Man. One of my lights just went out. Anyway, Jean Grey is one of the X-Men, or X-women, who can basically control things with her mind. And Jean eventually gets captured, which Clearly that sounds familiar for the first season of Stranger Things, but eventually she gets captured, she gets manipulated, and this whole ordeal basically unleashes this thing called the Dark Phoenix, which is this ancient being, entity, force. It's not really clear what it is, but it occasionally uses Jean Grey as a host in order to enact its actions or plans. And so you've got this telekinetic girl with a connection to this strange, mysterious, powerful force or being, and eventually Jean Grey mind blasts one of the other villains, and in the process kind of smashes him against this wall. She pins him, she holds him against the wall as she's blasting him with her powers, much in the same way that she did with the Demogorgon and also with Henry Creel in the Rainbow Room. And the only real part of the plot that we haven't fully yet experienced is Jean Grey as the Dark Phoenix fighting against the X-Men, with her actually almost killing all of them in the process. And so this also tied into the earlier theory about 11 ultimately being the final boss of the series, you know, with perhaps the Mindflayer, which is kind of like the Dark Phoenix, with it taking over and possessing 11. And then also in the comic book, it ends up with Xavier basically freeing Jean Grey by kind of, you know, using his mind powers. And this could tie into the new/old character being number 8, as she has seemingly mind manipulation powers. So that could be a more direct tie-in where 8 ends up freeing 11, and then as a gang they end up closing the portal and or destroying the Mindflayer. Tier 6, the D&D Campaign. So as this is the deepest tier, we also have some of the deepest, craziest, most outlandish theories, and this I think certainly qualifies for one of them. And on one hand, this theory is a little bit tame. It's not completely bonkers, but this entry partly refers to the kids in the series just playing D&D, because, you know, even from the first episode they're like super nerdy kids, they're playing D&D, they have these characters, and we actually get a lot of the names in the series from their D&D universe. Like, for example, Vecna obviously never called himself Vecna, but Vecna himself is just a character in D&D, and so when the kids experience it, they're like, oh, it's kind of like Vecna. And we also get the Demogorgon's name from D&D, as well as the Upside Down being kind of inspired by a realm like the Shadowfell, for example. And there's a bunch of other references, but the main crazy theory behind this entry is the theory that this entire series is just one big D&D game or D&D campaign, and at the end of season 5, like, they'll defeat Vecna, they'll defeat the Mindflayer, and then it'll like just zoom out and apparently become very blurry, but it'll zoom out and there will be, like, you know, these kids, Dustin, Will, etc. They'll just be sitting around the table just like in season 1, and they'll be like, yeah, that was a crazy game we just played. With the idea being that they made all of this in their head, they planned it out, they put it down into a D&D campaign, and then they played it out, and the TV series we're watching is just a visualization of them playing their campaign. Which, yeah, I think that's a crazy theory. I think it's probably a terrible decision if they were to go that route, which I can almost guarantee they will not go that route, as it'll just cheapen basically everything that happened in the entire series. But there is a reason that this is in the final bottom tier. Papa is Mike. Oh boy. So this theory involves 11 fighting and killing Vecna, and then defeating the Mindflayer, and then collapsing all of the gateways, and then eventually dying. And then Mike going back in time somehow, maybe through Henry's grandfather clock or something. So Mike goes back in time, he starts the Hawkins lab, and he builds up all the experiments, eventually seeks out 11 and makes sure that she's put into these experiments and that they kind of inspire and develop and curate her powers so that she will eventually become stronger and then go through everything she went through throughout all of the seasons, because she is the only way that the world will defeat the Demogorgons and Vecna. And so because this will be one kind of time loop, the theory says that this is why Papa feels so connected to 11, because, you know, he knows her, he used to be one of her best friends, he's experienced all this in his youth as Mike, and apparently they have the same or at least similar haircuts, nose shapes, and yeah, It is a very wild theory, probably not the absolute wildest out there, or maybe it is. Let me know down in the comments below. But also let me know some of your craziest, perhaps, headcanon theories, as I would love to hear them, especially before the end of season 5. But sadly, that is all we have time for. This video was honestly very, very fun to make. I am massively enjoying Stranger Things at the moment, but also a little bit sad that we will have to wait until after Christmas, until the New Year's, in order to see the rest of season 5. But I trust that it will be a fantastic finale nonetheless. As always, if you like the video, then like the video. If you don't want to miss any future videos, do subscribe and hit the bell icon. And also do that weird new hype thing. Again, I don't know exactly how it works, but these all do help me out, help out the channel, as we are trying to reach our goal of 100 million subscribers by the end of the year. And as always, thanks for watching.